Alrighty, folks, let's talk about sky maps. Oops. So first off, a sky map, like any other map, shows locations. Specifically, this is showing us the locations of stars that are visible in our night sky. Now, what's visible in the night sky isn't constant all the time. It depends on several different things. First off, it depends on your latitude. At different latitudes, you're going to see different stars and celestial objects. It's also going to depend on the month of the year. Certain constellations and certain stars are only visible in like the summer or only visible in the winter. And it also depends on the time of night. The stars will appear to traverse the sky over the course of a night. So when you're using a sky map, you need to make sure it's the right latitude for you, it's the correct month, and you need to know what time of night you should be going out to make sure your sky map accurately reflects where things are going to be. And again, that's because the relative position of a star depends on your location and time. But once again, it's not the stars that are moving, right? The stars are stationary where they are in the sky. It's us on the Earth that's moving. The Earth's orbit or revolution around the sun and its rotation on its axis once a day are what cause the stars to appear to change positions on us. When you're looking at a sky map, the month and time for the sky map are located in the upper right corner of the page. And notable events that happen to be occurring that month are located on the left side of the page. Oh, also, all the times that are listed on a sky map are typically listed in universal time or UT. You might have also heard this referred to as like Greenwich Mean Time. Currently, because we're on daylight savings time, Eastern Standard Time is going to be equal to universal time minus 4 hours. So if you want to know our current time versus UT, just subtract 4 hours. When we're not on daylight savings time, it's for Eastern, it's UT minus 5 hours. So when we're looking at the sky map, the circular edge of the sky map represents the horizon. And if you look really, really closely at the very center of the sky map, there is a faint like little plus sign cross. That little cross at the center represents the zenith. So what this tells us, if a star is close to the edge of our sky map, we should be looking at it close to the horizon. If our sky map, if a star is close to the center of the sky map, we should be looking closer to our zenith for it. So zenith and horizon are kind of our main like clues for what, along with cardinal directions, for what part of the sky we should be looking in to locate a particular star or planet. When you are using a sky map, you need to rotate the circle so that the direction you are facing is at the bottom of the circle. So if I just pick up the sky map like I'm going to read it, south is at the bottom. But if I was facing east, I would need to take my sky map and I'd need to rotate it so that the direction east was at the bottom if I was looking east. Another important piece of information that is on a sky map is a star's magnitude. Now, magnitude is its apparent brightness. Now, magnitude and like actual brightness, or what we call a star's luminosity, are not the same thing. So magnitude is how bright we think it looks from our perspective on Earth. But there's several different factors that affect a star's magnitude. So first off is just how much light and energy does the star put off, right? Like some stars are just naturally very dim and they don't put out much light, but there are other stars that put out as much light and energy in a day that the sun does in a year. So some stars are just naturally really bright, others are dim. Another thing that will affect a star's magnitude is how far away it is. If a star is closer to Earth, it's going to look brighter. But if it's farther away, it's going to look dimmer. A star's magnitude on a sky map is represented by the size of the dot that represents the star. So if you look at the sky map, you see all the stars are represented with little circular dots, and some of the dots are small and some are bigger. The bigger the dot, the brighter that star, or the greater its magnitude. This is really useful when you're trying to figure out, maybe what you necessarily can observe. For example, if you're like me and you live in the city, there's a lot of light pollution around you that's going to wash out dimmer stars. However, even if you live in the city, you should still be able to see very, very bright stars. So again, if you're like me, when you go out looking for stars, you want to focus on the ones that have really big magnitudes. Those are the ones that you're going to be most easily able to find. Now, if you live in a much darker area, like let's say you're kind of out in the country, you're going to be able to probably pick out a few more of these dimmer objects as well. But the bigger the dot on the star map, the greater the magnitude or the brighter the star will appear. Let's talk about some tips for observing the night sky, because this is kind of the fun part of astronomy. First off, you want to observe from the darkest location possible. Obviously, if we're trying to do some backyard observations, sometimes there's things we can't control, right? Like if you're like me and you live in the city, you're gonna have light pollution. But if you live out in the country a little bit, maybe think about those things like, if you've got outdoor lights, turn off your outdoor lights when you want to observe. I also recommend if you ever get the chance to visit a dark sky preserve. There's actually one in Kindy, Michigan, which is near or I guess Port Austin technically, which is near the tip of the thumb that I have been to. And it's fantastic, the number of stars and how bright the Milky Way is when you can be in a truly, truly dark area. But the darker, the better for observing. Secondly, you need to wait 10 to 20 minutes for your eyes to fully adjust to the dark. And that seems like a long period of time, but that's how long it takes for your pupils to fully dilate to their the biggest that they can get so you can really take in the stars. And this is particularly apparent if you're in a really dark area. Like if you get the chance to be out somewhere really dark, if you sit in the dark, you will notice over that 10 to 20 minutes, you'll be able to start seeing more stars. So wait that time for your eyes to fully adjust. Secondly, if you need to use a light, for example, to see your sky map, it needs to be a red light. So we're talking a red LED, or you can even just take a regular flashlight and cover it with red plastic or paper. Like I said, this isn't probably as important, if you're in the city and you got a lot of light pollution around you. But if you are in a really, really dark area, this is critical because red light will not disrupt your night vision. Anything else definitely will. So especially if you're in a dark area, never pull out your phone if you're observing the stars. It will totally wreck your night vision. Which is why, especially if you get to be in a really dark area, a paper sky map can be convenient. Lastly, you want to take into account what moon phase you're in. The moon is an absolutely beautiful and fantastic thing to observe, especially if you have a pair of binoculars or telescope to kind of check it out with. However, bright moonlight will wash out dimmer stars. So if you want to observe the stars or other objects, you should do it as close to the new moon as possible. Okay. So now we'll take a little bit of time to just kind of talk about this month's sky map. Like I said, on the left side, there's a lot of stuff. Since it's the end of the month, most of the stuff is passed. But as you notice, full moon is technically today. And if you look again in the upper right-hand corner, you see that it tells you in early April, you should be out at 10 p.m. And in late April, like right now, you should be out closer to 9 p.m. to use the sky map. So that's where you're going to figure out what time of night you should be out at. You should also see that there's a variety of other symbols other than just the circles that are used to represent stars. They've got symbols for galaxies, double stars, variable stars, nebulae, star clusters as well. Now, a lot of those other types of objects you're not going to be able to see with the naked eye, but some of them are viewable even with just binoculars. And of course, if you have a telescope, there's lots of things that you can check out. Another thing to think about when you're doing like some backyard observing is think about how much of the horizon can you see? So for example, me, I live in the city. I've got to deal with a lot of light pollution, so I got to focus on bright objects. I also do not have a lot of horizon. There's a lot of trees and buildings around me. So I also only have, for the most part, viewing around the zenith. So those are things you got to think about when you want to do some viewing. Right now, though, Ursa Major, which contains the Big Dipper, is very, very close to the zenith. So that's a great thing to try to look for, especially if you have a decent view of the northern sky. If you've got a decent view of the northern sky, you should also be able to find the NCP, which is marked by the star Polaris, and the Little Dipper. The sky map actually shows you what the trick is to find the Little Dipper, because the Little Dipper is a little bit dimmer than the Big Dipper, so sometimes you have a hard time finding it. But if you find the Big Dipper, the stars in the ladle of the Big Dipper should point in a straight line to the handle of the Little Dipper. And they even kind of show you that a little bit. If you have a good view of the western horizon, you should be able to find Mars at night. It's going to be an extremely bright object. That's actually the only planet that's visible at this time of year. The constellation Boötes and the star Arcturus. Arcturus is a very bright star. It's fairly close to the zenith. It's about halfway between the zenith and the eastern horizon. So that could be another good one to practice finding. But if you've never tried to find constellations before, I would definitely start by looking for Ursa Major and the Big Dipper, and then use that to help you find the Little Dipper or Ursa Minor. If we look at the back side of our sky map, we can see they've got a variety of things on there as well. So they give you a little bit of information about celestial objects. They give you some of the same tips for viewing the night sky that I did. And they define some of the terms that they use on here. Then they tell you what some of the things you can easily see with the naked eye. So they list all of the really bright stars in the sky. So all of those stars are things that you should be able to see with your unaided eye. And for the most part, you're going to be able to see them even in the city because they are very, very bright. They also list a whole bunch of objects that you can see with binoculars. So if you have a good pair of binoculars, it's worth breaking them out to see if you can spot a few extra things in the sky, especially if you are in a darker area. And then of course, telescopic objects. Now, if you really want to get into, like viewing things in the night sky, binoculars are actually a great way to start, because they're usually much cheaper than getting a telescope, and they tend to be a lot easier to use. Telescopes, depending on what type you're getting, can be more complicated to kind of figure out. The only things to note with binoculars is that because unlike a telescope that's going to have a tripod, you're holding it with your hands. So chances are there's going to be some shakiness. So I always recommend if you're going to observe something with binoculars, find a way to prop the binoculars on something. For example, this winter, we had the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. I viewed that through some binoculars, but I managed to find a spot on my porch where I could sit with my binoculars, and I like braced my arms against my chest and my knees as I kind of like sat there curled up looking at it. But binoculars are a great thing to break out. If you've never tried to look at anything in the sky with binoculars, the full moon is out there right now. And like I said, the moon looks way cooler when you view it through binoculars or a telescope. Questions on anything related to sky maps and stuff? Like I said, we're getting to the time of the year where it's getting warmer and we're having clear skies more consistently. So I always recommend, when we got a clear sky and you got a minute, take a look and check out the stars and stuff.